Okay, hi everyone. So since yesterday I talked about sexual orientation, I thought it was appropriate for me to add a little note about transgender employees because a lot of times in LGBT research people say LGBT in the title, and then when you get to the methods section they say, well actually we didn't include any transgender people, but someone else should do that. So I didn't want to also do that by covering sexual orientation and not transgender issues, so here we go. Mine's more conceptual, so words matter. These are the words we frequently see with regard to gender. But even though we're so used to using them, I believe that these words are limiting. I believe they've limited me, they've limited you, they've limited us as a society. They confine people to being one thing, a ball of stereotypes and punishments for stepping out of line with these stereotypes, to being a man or a woman, a he or a she, just and never both. But we know that gender doesn't always work that way. In fact, in our studies, we've started asking about gender on a continuum as opposed to a checkbox. And what do we find? We find variability. Men actually rate themselves as being somewhat feminine and sometimes the same on both. Females do the same thing. And so what we're finding here is that transgender individuals have highlighted and genderqueer individuals have highlighted for a long time that these words are troublesome, they're rigid, and our participants are telling us that the checkbox is too rigid. They don't account for variability within category. They don't allow for new and different forms of gender expression to exist. Even for those who are non-transgender, these forms of words and language are limiting and binding. They have stereotypes associated with them. We know them. Men are viewed as being strong and willful, agentic, decisive. Women are viewed as being nurturing, caring, focused on building relationships. And so while many people fight to preserve these words, while many people feel these words are natural, if you don't believe me, go look at my TED Talk on transgender issues and read the comments section. People are accusing me of going against nature, going against God, et cetera, et cetera. So while many people fight to preserve these words, I believe that they are just words. We can change them, and we might want to, because these words are dangerous. They're loaded. They are in some ways a trap, but I don't believe that they're final. We can get past these words. There are ways that we might change our language to be more inclusive. There are ways we might change our language to reflect what we are now seeing in society. Brave individuals who are highlighting that our categories are ever present, but they are not everlasting. They don't work in the way we need them to all the time. They don't work in a way that supports freedom of choice and freedom from stereotypes. But gendered language doesn't have to be a prison. Just as we invented gendered words, we can invent words that are inclusive. We choose our words, and in choosing our words carefully, we can create a language that's more inclusive. If you think it's hard to invent words, think about how quickly slang terms catch on. My students use words, many words, that did not exist when I was a student, but everyone can interpret them. We all know what they mean, and they're being used just like that. Gendered language could catch on in the same, changing gendered language could catch on in the same way. We could be part of the revolution of using language that includes individuals for whom language doesn't currently work, and for those who don't wish to associate with the historic connotations that come along with gender divisions within our language and our society. If there's a will to change language, and if we use past precedent, both with regard to words that have fallen out of favor and words that have found their way into our vernacular, there is a way. We have banished lots of commonly used words from language before, and we can do it again. Of course, this will be faced with resistance, but instead of resisting change agents in society, we should value them. I would strongly argue that the almost 2% of the population that identifies as transgender or genderqueer are not making trouble in attempting to open our eyes to new ways of using language. They are highlighting a place in society where our traditions are not working. Instead of ousting the minority view from the conversation, which is what we frequently do, I believe that it's time to make the minority group the focus. If our current language is limiting some people, let's remove the limits. So I want to tell you a story from my research. I do a lot of qualitative and quantitative research in the area of transgender employment. And I can tell you a story of someone who goes by Z, a friend of mine, also a participant in the study, who is tired of being defined by social expectations for their gender expression. Z wears clothes that are stereotypically associated with both genders, even creates new clothes that are gender creative, has sexual relationships with individuals who express gender in all different ways, and is highly successful in their field of study. Z is very intelligent, and in my opinion, is an innovator. If you go to any business conference in any school on any continent, you will now hear scholars and practitioners talking about out-of-the-box thinking, that the future belongs to those who aren't afraid to go against the grain, to shake things up, to create something new that the world didn't know existed. But the flip side of this is that Z's story also has a negative side. Z has faced a lot of employment discrimination, despite their many talents. This story for me highlights that in the same arena in which we value or say we value innovators, when it comes to gender, we value traditionalists, or those who fit with some form of neo-traditionalism that has become acceptable with the passage of time. So I believe that innovation is not best practice when you turn it on and off. It's best practice as a way of life. However, for some reason, when it comes to gender, even those who fancy themselves to be fathers and mothers of innovation at work are still very tied to the ideas of fathers, mothers, and a traditionally rooted practice of gender within organizations. So now some questions. If you think back on your life and the way you've loved it, think back on your choices and the way you've made them. How would you have thought of yourself differently if you were not defined as a he or she? And I want you to think about where you would be right now if you hadn't been assigned that from day one. Thank you.